You say that you don't like them, but I see you all the time. Hey everyone, my name is Allie and welcome to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing my September and October wrap up because I didn't end up doing a wrap up for September, so we kind of have to mash them both together now. And then I'm also going to talk about some of the books that I am currently reading and some of the books I want to read in November. So I only read 2 books in September. September was kind of a rough month for me, mainly because I had a lot of school stuff to do in September. So many things were due, so many different projects and essays and things like that. And I also was reading a book for class in September, so it was just really difficult to get anything done in that month. And I feel like it kind of set me back a little bit, but it's okay. It's not a big deal. I've already completed my Goodreads goal. I'm not too worried about it, but I only read 2 books in September, so it's a little disappointing, but we are far past September now, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. So the first book that I read in September was Hello Girls by Brittany Cavallaro and Emily Henry. I gave this book about a 3.5 stars out of 5. And it was very middle of the road for me. I really enjoyed the first half of the book, even though it was a little confusing between both of the perspectives. It was a little difficult for me to discern who was one girl and who was the other girl. I can't remember their names. I think one of them is Winona. And the other is Lucille, and I just found it super hard to figure out who was talking and who had which life. Even though they were very different characters, it was very confusing. I think that for me personally, I can't read books that are written by 2 people. I've tried many, many times and it never works out for me. I don't think I've ever read a book that was written by 2 authors that I actually enjoyed or, whatever. It didn't work out for me. So I didn't end up really enjoying this book too much. So basically, this is about Lucille and Winona, and their lives are kind of shitty, and they want to move away and create their own lives together as best friends, or as possibly more. I think that there is a little bit of queer subtext within this book, and I definitely think that the 2 of them could potentially be a couple in the future, but that's not really explored within this novel. It's kind of like a very Thelma and Louise sort of story. So if you're into books about 2 girls getting into trouble, I think that this is perfect for you. But for me personally, I just couldn't really enjoy the story, mainly because it was just too confusing. And I also didn't really enjoy the ending. I felt like it ended too abruptly, and it wasn't a very satisfying ending for me personally. So I gave it 3.5 stars, and it was just meh. I don't really have any super strong feelings about it. The next book I read was one that I read on audiobook, and it's definitely probably one of my new favorite books of the year, and one of my new favorite books of all time. So this book is The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna, and I always forget the author, but the book cover will be on the screen somewhere, and I loved this book so much. Basically, I saw this book in a Target once. I thought the cover was really cool and it caught my eye, and I'm like, okay, put that in my Goodreads. I might want to read it at some point, especially since I've gotten into more adult books this year, which is super exciting, and I'm very proud of myself. And surprisingly enough, I ended up finding the audiobook on Hoopla. And if you don't know what Hoopla is, that's basically an app where you can watch movies, listen to music, watch TV shows, or listen to audiobooks or read ebooks, and it's all through your library. So some libraries have it, some libraries don't. Thankfully, my library has it available, and I was able to connect my library card to Hoopla to, check out some books, and I was so excited when they had Stella Fortuna, and I didn't really know what to expect when going in. I didn't really read too much of the synopsis because I didn't want to be too spoiled, and I love going into books a little bit like I don't know what's going on, and I loved it so much. Basically, it's about the titular character, Stella Fortuna, and it goes throughout her entire life, even before she's born and then until after she's gone. And I just thought it was one of the most beautiful books that I have ever read, and it was just mind-blowing. Basically, Stella Fortuna is born in a very small town in Italy, and her father leaves and goes off to America to kind of start a life there and hopefully build a life good enough for his family to come over to America. And when she's a teenager, he is able to bring his family over to America, and she has a life there as well. So it really goes through her entire life, and nothing really gets left out. And like the title says, it is about the 7 or 8 deaths within her life. And it's basically all of these like near-death experiences that she has, and she's kind of seen as a little bit unlucky and just kind of gets into trouble a lot. And I just loved her character so much. She's so headstrong and so like set in her beliefs, and she's kind of the type of character who doesn't want to get married. She wants to be alone and independent, and I really admired that about her. And she was very, very stubborn, which was kind of frustrating at points, but I actually really enjoyed it in the end. And I love Stella Fortuna. She's just like, everything about her is so iconic, and I can't believe that more people haven't read this book because it's just so amazing. It is a little dense, I feel like, at times, mainly because it is a historical fiction book, and I know a lot of people don't like historical fiction, but I really enjoyed it. I love historical fiction, and I felt like the audiobook really did the book justice. Also, this book has a lot to do with Italian heritage and culture, and if that's something that interests you, you might really enjoy this book. So I don't want to talk about it too much because I don't want this to turn into a review for Stella Fortuna, but I loved it. I thought it was beautiful, and if you're interested in Italian culture or historical fiction or anything like that, just check it out, try it out. I totally recommend the audiobook. Okay, on to the books that I read for October. I read 7 books in the month of October, so it was a much better month than September, and it went really well. There were a few snags, and I didn't really complete any of the books that I set out to read for the Latinx Book Bingo Readathon, which was super disappointing, and I was like, I was very frustrated with myself. But thankfully, I was actually able to reread one of my favorite series of all time. So the first book that I read was The Selection by Kiera Cass, and I gave that a 5 out of 5 stars, and I love this series so much. It's so incredible, and I don't know, like, I read this series after high school, so it was right in the beginning of college, and I started reading it, and I just fell in love with it so easily, and I haven't reread it since then. So it's been like around like five years-ish, and I loved every second of rereading this series. I decided to reread it as an audiobook, so I got all the audiobooks from Hoopla, which was so nice. And basically, if you don't know what The Selection is about, it's kind of like The Bachelor set in a semi-dystopian futuristic America. And America is actually called Ilia, so it's the country of Ilia, and in Ilia we have a monarchy. So there is Prince Maxen, which I'm sure you've heard his name before. And incorporating the Bachelor sort of idea, he ends up having a selection where he invites a bunch of girls into the castle, palace, whatever, and he has to choose between all of those girls in order to find the one that he's going to marry, and she will become queen alongside him. So our main character is America, and she gets chosen for the selection, and she is just the best, and I love her. I love her character. I love Maxen. I love this entire story, and I love everything that happens in those books. It's just like, I didn't really remember a lot of what happened in The Selection the first time I read it, and then the second time I read it, so many things were like, oh yeah, I remember this happening, or oh yeah, this happened, and oh my gosh, I can't remember, like, I can't believe this happened. And I know it's like so vague, but I just love this series. I feel like this is a series that everyone should read if you're on BookTube, or if you're a book reader, or if you're like a YA reader. Like, if you haven't read The Selection, what are you doing? Like, I just don't understand. But I also read The Elite and The One, and that kind of completes out the first trilogy of this series, and it's all about America Singer and her journey through The Selection, and I love it. I love America. I love Maxen. I love their story. And then you get into The Heir and the Crown, and that kind of, rounds out the whole series. It's the end half duology, and that actually centers around Edelyn Shreve, and that is America and Maxen's daughter. And a lot of people are kind of like torn about that duology. Like, some people really like it, other people really don't. I personally really love it. I gave The Heir 5 stars, and then I gave The Crown 4 stars. So basically The Crown is the only book out of the entire series that I gave 4 stars, and it's mainly because she didn't end up with who I wanted her to end up with, but that's just okay. It's totally fine. I cried about it. It's fine, but I love this series so much. I don't want to keep rambling on about it, but just trust me, read the series. Don't take it too seriously. Don't be like, oh, I'm too good for this series. No, you're not too good for this series. The selection is just, it's amazing. It's a joy to read. It's so much fun, and I think you'll have a good time reading it. So I only read 2 physical books in the month of October, and the first one is The Seduction of the Minotaur by Anais Nin, and I gave this, I think, 2 stars out of 5, and I just wasn't a huge fan of this book. The writing is really gorgeous and beautiful, but I just didn't really enjoy the themes of this book, I guess, because a lot of it has to do with this woman, this white woman, going to Latin America and finding herself and kind of like trying to learn from the sort of savage ways of the native people in Latin America, and that just didn't vibe well with me. The writing is gorgeous. There are some really beautiful quotes that come from this book, but overall, I couldn't really mesh well with the message, and I just didn't really enjoy like the exploitation of Latin American people, especially the native people, and I just didn't like that part. So I decided to give it a 2 out of 5 stars. I kept lowering it. Like, at first it was 3 stars, then it was 2 stars. And I'm just not a huge fan of it. It was super easy to read though, which was great, especially since it was assigned reading in my class. So I'm glad that I got it over with, but it wasn't for me. And then the very last book that I read in October was Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. So this book has kind of been getting a lot of hype on book Twitter, and I think it kind of deserves it, honestly. It's such a fun book, and I had such a good time reading it. Basically, this book is about a witch and a witch hunter, and they, under some crazy circumstances, have to get married. And the witch hunter actually doesn't know that his bride is a witch, so that kind of like adds a lot more drama and fun to the novel. Honestly, I had a great time reading it. I loved the main character Louise's point of view, and just like her entire personality was so funny. She was always cracking jokes. She's always kind of pushing it to the edge. And then Reed, the guy that she has to marry, the witch hunter, is just so straight-laced and like proper, and he's kind of a man of the church, and she's a witch, and the church and the witches are kind of like at odds with each other. And it's really interesting because Louise isn't technically like part of a coven or anything. She's actually running away from her coven, and she's kind of sworn off magic, but she's still really against like the capture and killing of other witches, and she isn't really into the whole like church thing. And I just thought that it was super interesting the way that these two main characters interacted together. It's definitely more of a slow-ish burn, hate-to-love romance. I love slow burn romances, and I especially love hate-to-love romances, so having those two together really felt good. And I also felt like their relationship was able to progress in a really natural way. And I did see that there was some criticism of the relationship being too fast or like insta-lovey, which I don't agree with personally. I felt like it was very natural, but I mean, to each their own. Anyone can have their own opinions. However, I don't agree with that. I felt like it was very natural, and it actually took like around 300 pages for them to finally be like, oh, maybe I like this person. I don't like, who would have thought? And I actually did read another book, or at least like read most of another book that did have a hate-to-love romance, but it was solved within the first 100 pages. And it also happened in Red, White, and Royal Blue, where the hate-to-love was solved within the first 100 pages, which is just very disappointing. And I cannot stand when books are marketed as hate-to-love, but the romance gets solved in the first 100 pages. No, we need at least 300 pages of that. Maybe even a whole book. Maybe even a whole series. Honestly, I love slow burn, so that's just kind of like my jam, my cup of tea, and this was perfect for that. One of the only reasons I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars instead of a 5 out of 5 was mainly because I felt like the plot was a little lacking, and also there were some sort of problematic elements of this book, specifically sort of the idea that women are female because they can give birth and stuff like that. So there was a hint of transphobia in there, which really didn't sit well with me, so I did have to knock a star off for both of those points. And yeah, I did really end up enjoying this book, and I cannot wait for the sequel. I think it's going to be phenomenal, and I'm very excited to see where Shelby Mahurin goes with this story and with this couple. Okay, finally I got through all of the books that I've read in September and October. Now I'm going to go on to the books that I want to read in November and that I am already currently reading. So currently I am reading this big ol' stack of books, which is unfortunate, really. I hate reading like a bunch of books at one time. I really prefer reading one book at a time, but for some reason I decided I wanted to read 4 books at one time. So the first book that I am currently reading is Find Me Their Bones by Sarah Wolf, and this is the sequel to Bring Me Their Hearts, which I love, and I am really loving the sequel. I actually have the arc for it, which is really cool. And I'm just loving Zara and getting back into this world and revisiting these characters and their dynamics. And I'm just really excited about it, honestly. This is like one of my most anticipated books of the year, and I can't believe that I'm actually currently reading it. The next book is another one that I actually have heard a lot of hype about, and that is House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. And I am currently 143 pages into this book, which is pretty good, and I am loving it so far. It's basically a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling. It is set on like the seashore, and it's just so beautiful and so atmospheric, and I am just really enjoying it. I've never actually read a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling that I've enjoyed, so this is very exciting. The next is another highly anticipated book, and that is Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered by Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark. And if you didn't know, I really love the podcast My Favorite Murder, and that's their podcast, and this is their book. And I am just super enjoying it. It's very, very funny. It's very much Karen and Georgia, like their voices are so strong and present within this book. And I'm just really excited to read through it. I feel like I could get through it pretty fast. It's really, really thin. And I love getting to hear more from them. The last book I'm trying to get through right now is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and I am currently about halfway through this book. I think I'm like on chapter something. I really honestly don't know. The last place that I left off was 121, I guess, but I've actually read more of the audiobook since then, so I think I'm a bit past that. But I'm currently reading it as an audiobook. I did try to read it physically, and I just couldn't get into it. So I decided to go towards the audiobook, and I'm actually way more enjoying the audiobook than I ever thought I would. And I totally recommend it if you're kind of struggling with the physical book to go ahead and get the audiobook, because it's much easier to understand, and I am blowing through it. So for this, I decided to only pick 2 books this time because I didn't really want to give myself a huge TBR. And that first book is If We Were Villains by ML Rio, and this was on my last month's TBR. Didn't get to it. Definitely need to get to it, and I think I'm really going to enjoy this. I keep hearing really good hype about this book, and I am very excited to read it. And the next book is The Accident Season by Moira Foyle Doyle, and I got this book quite a while ago, I think from my wish list. I want to say, because, yeah, I did get it from my wish list, and it doesn't say who it's from, but it does say Merry Christmas, so it's been here for a while, and I definitely need to read it. It's very, very short, so I think I should be able to get through it pretty fast. And it says on the back, for Kara and her family, every October is inexplicably accident-prone. Some years it's bad, like the season when her father died, and some years it's just cuts and scrapes. But this accident season, when Kara and her stepbrother Sam and her best friend Bea are 17, none of that will make a difference, because the lines between fantasy and reality are starting to blur, and some secrets are threatening to be revealed. And I am just so excited to get to this book. I haven't really heard a lot about it, so I don't really know if people enjoy it or not, but I am really excited to get into it, especially during the fall season. Okay, so those are all of the books that I've read in September and October, and the books that I plan to read in November. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope it wasn't too long or too tedious, and if you did enjoy it, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also, go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!